Well, after the court delivered its judgment, Zimbabwe's president-elect Emmerson Mnangagwa took to Twitter. Well, the now president-elect of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Mnangagwa, thanked the people of Zimbabwe and reiterated calls for peace. The country's finance minister, Patrick Chinamasa, says the inauguration will take place on Sunday, the 26th of August. And for more on this, I'm joined by Zimbabwean political commentators Tino Mambeu and Acie Lumumba. Gentlemen, a very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to The Globe.
Thank you.
Now, Acie, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah.
We saw President-elect Emmerson Mnangagwa taking to Twitter saying that the outcome was actually expected. Are you at all surprised?
No, absolutely not surprised. In fact, I could have told you this is how, in fact, I did tell you this is how it was going to end when it began. You have only one duty before the courts, which is to provide empirical evidence. They failed the test to provide empirical evidence against the president, against the elections, and in the absence of proving the evidence, you can't say confidence is evidence, you can't say social media is evidence, you can't say I am convinced is evidence. Evidence has to be provided empirically beyond any reasonable doubt. The lawyers of the MDC failed to do that, and they were judged and marked on the basis of that. Now the country must move forward.
Tino, we've seen the MDC holding numerous press conferences saying that they had overwhelming evidence against the ZEC and ZANU-PF, but then they failed to provide such evidence.
Well, it's either here or there. I think I need to correct you in terms of having failed to provide evidence. Now, the evidence that you so require, I want to be a little bit more clear and technical with you. And I would appreciate that you and the listeners get to listen to my example. Now, the product of 1 + 1 is always 2. And it will be very confusing for anybody to then demand that bring evidence that 1 + 1 is 2. Because already we know that for you to be able to have an outcome of 1 + 1, 2, if you were in addition, that is where you got it from, right? So I think the MDC did exceptionally well in terms of putting together proof that the numbers announced by the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission are not correct, and they had discrepancies, which discrepancies have the potential, by and large, to affect the outcome, judging with the mere fact that Mr. Mnangagwa's win is very narrow. So what I would have expected, I know I'm not in the judiciary of Zimbabwe, but the best case that we should have witnessed, if the judiciary had the interests of the people of Zimbabwe at heart, they would have edged towards a runoff, not only to try and suit the egos of the MDC and its followers, but to give Mr. Mnangagwa an overwhelming chance, a position to say, let me show you how I have done it. I have done it before. I've got 73% in parliament. I'm still going to beat this guy hands down. And what that does, it does not only help us within Zimbabwe itself, it also helps us internationally and with all the eyes that are looking at us. Remember, this is not the first election that has been disputed in Zimbabwe. What we have said is to the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, please give us a process that we will not need to dispute. But they have failed in that mandate. And the evidence that we have seen being brought in court to, on Wednesday, it is to suggest that the process was not free, was not fair, was not credible. However, we have got to take note of one thing. The Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, its lawyers, Mnangagwa's lawyers, they were never asked anything in court of materiality by the judges. And what we saw the judges saying today is what they were also saying accordingly in court to the other guys. But at the end of the day, we as Zimbabweans, we don't want court cases. We don't want illegitimacy. We want a legitimate solution. But now what we hope for as we go forward is that this illegitimate result and the illegitimate inauguration or whatever that we are going to get, though it has been endorsed and we respect the courts in Zimbabwe, we hope that we do not have now the national peace being illegitimized or being, stolen the same way the election has been stolen. So we now hope Mr. Mnangagwa's inauguration, as they are in power, they are not going to now manipulate the national peace such that we'll always have problems.
Tino, you're still not telling me. You're crying foul over this election. You keep on saying that this election was illegitimate, the result was illegitimate,
yes.
and of course the subsequent inauguration was illegitimate.
Yes.
But you're not coming up with a tangible evidence that would give claim to your claims that this election was actually rigged. The MDC has been saying that there's been ghost voters, ghost polling station, and that the ZEC created 69,000 voters in favor of the MDC, or rather of the ZANU-PF. Where is the evidence? I guess that's the gist of why we're here. I guess that's the gist of why the Constitutional Court set to hear this case. Where is the evidence?
One thing I like about you is your wisdom. Now, if our judges had the same wisdom, I don't know whether they do have it or they ignored their wisdom, that you have right now as you are speaking to me, to be able to answer these questions, to say, how do we have 40,000 different 40,000 number as a difference between the parliamentary and the presidential vote? Because when you go into the polling station, you are given 3 ballots. And also what you should have understood, I don't know whether that information has reached you particularly as we speak right now. The MDC had a real case, and what they did, they said to the judges, they were in communication with the judges, and they were saying, we want to subpoena the commissioners from the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, because they know that when the information was coming as to these are the figures A, B, C, D that was being collated, that information was being entered into a server by the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission workers and the commissioners. But now, when votes were being collated, they were no longer being collated from the server. They were now being collated from an Excel workbook, which results had been manipulated. Now, we cannot be as naive as we may want to be, as naive or as stupid as people may want to be, and go to say that the person, the person who is being accused of the crime is the very same person who has been left to take care of the residue. It's obvious that the residue will be manipulated. Okay. The issue here was very clear. The numbers do not add up. We don't want to go and count, because what we are going to count may have been manipulated. So let's look at the numbers. And if the numbers don't add up, they don't add up. That is the gist of the argument.
Now, Acie, General Constantino Chiwenga told a gathering yesterday that nothing will change. They are tired of holding elections. So essentially, nothing will change. So will this outcome change the status quo in Zimbabwe?
First of all, I have no idea what Tino is talking about here. Like, I'm so completely unfounded by what, I have no idea what he's talking about, because the court process was very clear. MDC submitted an affidavit. In this affidavit, when they submitted the case, they say the following is the evidence we have. We have evidence of V11 forms that demonstrate we won. We have evidence of affidavits from people who were rigged. When they went to court, they were asked, show us the evidence. They said, well, we don't have to show you the evidence because you know that we're telling you the truth. So I've got absolutely no idea what he's talking about. But let's talk about what is important, which is what you have asked. What General Constantine Chiwenga was talking about yesterday is the path the country needs to go forward now. The country cannot obsess about elections. It cannot obsess about courts. It must obsess about progress. A program of action to change people's lives for the better is what the country now needs to focus on.
But it says nothing will change. I mean, that's a very pregnant and a loaded statement coming from the second in command.
What has happened is context has been removed from the statement he said. I listened and I watched the speech. What retired General Chiwenga was saying is, as far as the context of the debate that was happening in court, he was referring to the fight happening in court changing the outcome of the elections. And he said nothing will change because ZANU-PF won the elections. So there is nothing that is going to change to the extent of we are not going to see ourselves in a new election, we're not going to see ourselves in a runoff, neither are we going to see President Emmerson Mnangagwa no longer being president. So nothing is going to change to that extent. He went on in his speech to explain that President Mnangagwa, while he may be president-elect now, he is still president of the country, so nothing is going to change to the extent of the implementation of Vision 2030, which is the program President Emmerson Mnangagwa put before the people as we went towards the election. President Emmerson Mnangagwa has been castigated for a lot of things. From the day the man came into office, he's been told everything he can't do. But understand, and let me reiterate, since this man was 17 years old, he went to the war. He was told he would die in the war. He was hanged upside down on a telephone pole, and he was told he was going to die there. He lost one of his hearing abilities. He was put in prison and sentenced to life. They told him he wasn't going to come out. He came out, he was told he was unelectable. He was told even after winning the election, you can't have the election, let's take you to court. And even after that, he was told you're going to lose in court. The man is a grandmaster of survival, and he is going to defy all odds and lead the process of moving this country forward. Zimbabwe was trying to elect a chief builder. We've elected a chief builder, but the process of actually building the country has got nothing to do with President Emmerson Mnangagwa. It has everything to do with the people of Zimbabwe. And I think that's what the people want. Whether you're an MDC, whether you're in ZANU-PF, one thing we can agree on is Zimbabwe needs to get better. And that task cannot be left to a man. As a matter of fact, any country that has done well because it's the people of the country that moved it forward, not the president. Any country that hasn't done well is because they left the responsibility to a man and not to the country.
All right, Dino, you've heard Acie talk about that. Now, the CJ Malaba also said that Chamisa's claims could have been resolved if he approached the electoral court, to seek the reopening of the ballots. But then he decided to override that process. So is it fair to say that the MDC sold its supporters, its members, a dream? They betray them because, taking to the Constitutional Court, knowing very well that they don't have a watertight case.
We had a very watertight case. We still have a case. In effect, it's neither here or there. Chamisa won the elections. Now, we accept that. We also accept that this administration has manipulated the elections. We accept that. We accept that he has been declared the winner by the court. But let me give you one thing. On the eve of the sitting of the Constitutional Court, that was on Tuesday night, the defense forces of Zimbabwe, I'm talking of the defense forces. Those are the very same people who moved tanks into the street of Zimbabwe. They sent a congratulatory message to Mr. Mnangagwa saying, we congratulate you. For the past 2 weeks, they were quiet. They wait when the judges are sitting and say, we congratulate you. And we have Mr. Chiwenga saying, there is nothing that is going to change even if we go to court. So here is the simplest thing that you need to understand. Zimbabwe has been where it is before. And unfortunately, it is the citizens of Zimbabwe that continue to suffer. It would have been better. We are still going to go into 2023. But if we go into 2023 with a ZEC that is like this, with a military that is like this, with a Zimbabwean constitutional judge which behaves like a High Court, then we will have these problems. What we need to be doing to say, Mr. Mnangagwa, well, we have gone away with this one, we have taken it fair and fine. But please, make sure that in 2023, this thing does not repeat itself. We are tired of this change. And the only cure is not in repeating the rigging again, is making sure that the process which leads to election. I want to respond to one thing where you said you could have gone to open ballot boxes. You don't need to open manipulated ballot boxes. You are simply doing nothing. All we said, we were very clear. We said our case is based. This is the Zimbabwean people's case. And this is not a Chamisa's case. And the people of Zimbabwe are the ones that are going to react to this judgment, going forward and saying, how do we work, how do we do it? We love our country so much. But at the end of the day, the case was based on the numbers, the 16,000 votes that were given to Mr. Mnangagwa. And also, you must remember, when ZEC was asked in court, what do you say about the similarities between the figures that Mr. Mnangagwa would get and Mr. Chamisa would get? They never had a proper explanation. So they failed to explain. That did not need for anybody to go and open anything. Okay. It's all there. It's just arithmetic, and they manipulated it. And one thing also that I learned today from Zimbabwe, in a Zimbabwean scenario, they said as long as we can say it's 50 plus something, whether it's 50 plus 10,000, 50 plus 1 million, or 50 plus whatever, in Zimbabwean terms, it doesn't really matter. So what they are saying is you can claim and claim, as long as we want to call it 50 plus something, okay, it will never matter.
Now, Acie, I can't help notice how you kept on shaking your head vigorously in disapproval. Now, the Chief Justice again said that the world over, it is very difficult for a court to declare, or rather to set aside an election result, saying that it's not for the court to set aside an election result, but to uphold and sustain what the people have already decided. Well, I don't want to preempt the implications of that statement, but so many political analysts have been saying that that statement bears the hallmarks of leaning towards ZANU-PF.
It would be so much folly to take any advice on how to run an election from the MDC. Understand you're talking about a political party who, when they have their own internal elections, they are violent, they are disorganized, and there is absolutely no conclusion to anything. The president of MDC right now was not even elected into office. He got into office using a backdoor channel. We can never take advice from MDC on how to run an election because they have never run an election well by themselves. So it would be madness to take advice from people who cannot conduct an internal election. Now overnight they're experts of overall elections. But what the Chief Justice says is absolutely right. You look at any part of the world, including the United States of America, the George Bush-Al Gore election is a clear example where 17 times the votes were counted, 17 times the result was different, but when it went to the Supreme Court, the bench decided George Bush maintains to be the winner for the simple basis and reason that elections are not supposed to give you an empirical figure of how many people voted to cause the result. It's supposed to give you an empirical position of who won. I'll make it much simpler. I know you're running out of time. Is if it was supposed to give you an empirical figure, they'll say let everybody in the country vote because we want everybody to give us a scientific number. But they say let those who are registered be the ones who go and vote because they're not looking for a number. They're looking for a winner. And the process is always designed to give a winner. The court doesn't rule on that. It's the people. All the court does is deal with conflict when conflict comes, and that's what they did today.
All right. You've heard him. You said that Nelson Chamisa's aspirations or ambitions were actually unreasonable. In as much as he did well in garnering so many votes, actually more than what Morgan Tsvangirai, the late Morgan Tsvangirai, garnered in the past. But it is quite unreasonable for him to, to want to seize power at the first go.
No, where have you ever seen that? What you are saying is absolutely, out of, I don't know how to describe it. You don't seize power, you get voted. And when you get voted, you just go, under normal circumstances, you just assume power. So Nelson Chamisa never tried to seize power forcibly or by whatever means. In fact, he went in for the first round and he won it. But unfortunately, the results were manipulated. And that is why we are sitting here without Nelson Chamisa being the president of Zimbabwe. I believe he was voted for by 2.6 million Zimbabweans, and that is the victory which has been taken away from him. But we also urge ZANU-PF, don't take away the national pace again from the people of Zimbabwe. That is all we ask for. And we prepare for 2023. Let's make sure that the process which leads to elections is watertight, that there are no manipulations. We want a better country.
I'm still not convinced. You're saying that the vote was manipulated. How so? Where is the evidence?
We have spoken about the process. That's number one.
Where is the evidence?
I did not come with the evidence here, but I can highlight.
You say you do have the evidence?
Yes, yes.
Even the MDC lawyers failed to produce such evidence. Where do you get such evidence?
Which evidence did they have to produce? V11 forms?
Yes.
No, because V11 forms have...
No, I'm saying the MDC lawyers failed to produce tangible, concrete evidence that is enough to convince the Constitutional Court.
I have asked you a question. When you are in a harmonized election, and you have got a difference of 40,000 votes between the presidential and the MP votes, and there is no record of spoiled ballots or people placing ballots in wrong boxes, how do you then explain that? ZEC failed to explain that. There is no constituency in Zimbabwe where there was never a contestation. All the 210 constituencies in Zimbabwe were contested.
But that is not true. That is
not true.
There were over 10 constituencies in Zimbabwe where MDC didn't even fill the candidate.
Now this is your biggest problem.
Whose problem?
Biggest problem.
We don't have a problem.
Hang on a second, wait. Let him continue.
The biggest problem is imagining that the contest that happened in Zimbabwe was between two political parties. No, it was between 23 political parties. And in all the 210 constituencies, there were candidates that were fielded in there. So whether you want to say MDC did not, but we are saying the difference between presidential and parliamentary votes is 40,000. Can you dare to explain that? This is where the mathematics happened. I will tell you right now that it became very difficult, even after rigging, to throw Mnangagwa beyond 51% because the votes were no longer there, they were no longer available. But one thing that you should also remember, according to the process of counting elections in Zimbabwe, you firstly count presidential votes, presidential ballots, and you put them aside. So by the time you start counting council votes and counting MP votes, you already know that particular polling station who has won. That is the evidence which got manipulated. But fair and fine, they've manipulated it. Do not manipulate the economy. At least manipulate it in the favor of people. If for 1 second ZANU-PF would take the amount of time that they put on retaining power and manipulating power in trying to make sure that they put the same energy into
I wish we could go all night
we are the best.
In discussing this, but then thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That is Zimbabwean political commentators Tino Mambewe and Acie Lumumba, just giving us, helping us get some sense of the Zimbabwe's constitutional court ruling that essentially reaffirmed Emmerson Mnangagwa's presidency. He will be inaugurated on Sunday. This is The Globe on SABC.